Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in a Year 2021. And we are currently on day 167. And we are reading 1 Kings 9 and 2 Chronicles 8. So we're continuing to take a break from Proverbs as we look at the timeline of Solomon here, what's going on at this time. So we pick it up in 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 3, and we find that Yahweh is once again speaking with Solomon. This is the second time now. And by speaking to him, it's actually through a dream. And we don't stop and consider the number of ways that our Father actually speaks to us. And dreams are one of them. And when you are sensitive to him, you will understand what he is communicating with you. And the purpose of it is really the same reason that Jesus spoke in parables. It's he's speaking, but you have to have a sincere heart of seeking. You're seeking, and you will understand. You'll have the ability to interpret those dreams if you're honest and sincere with him and truly pressing into him. And so we have this with Solomon now. He's speaking to him in a dream, and he says, I have heard your prayer and your cry to me. I've set apart this temple that you built to put my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. And that's what Solomon had asked in the dedication, that whenever prayers are offered in the direction of the temple, in the direction of the temple, that Yahweh would hear. He would be attentive. Yahweh didn't really address the prayers prayed towards the temple, but he definitely said that his eyes and ears are attentive to that location for the prayers that are offered in that place. So, this is what he promises about the temple. And then he makes this promise about Solomon, and he says in verses 4 and 5, as for you, if you walk before me just as your father David did, with complete dedication and honesty, there you have it, dedication and honesty. Sometimes we're not even honest with ourselves. That's a big problem. We have to be willing to be honest with ourselves before we're even able to be honest with Yahweh. So with complete dedication and honesty, and if you do all that I have commanded and keep my regulations and case laws, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, just as I promised your father David. You will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. Now, don't forget, according to the first communication he had with Solomon, that he had promised that he was doing this because of his faithfulness to David. And then the promise to Solomon was long life if he walked in these ways. So that will help you to understand why it is that Solomon went sideways really bad, and yet he continued as king. But Solomon had a short life. He died around 58, 59 years old. And so you have to put everything together. That's why we're doing what we're doing together in this way. We're just trying to piece it all together in one coherent story, so that we can understand, when people say, well, why didn't he kick Solomon off the throne? And we're able to go back to these promises that were made. And then we get the flip side. Okay. If they don't walk in obedience, if they don't walk in this relationship. And this is what I want you to understand. It's about the relationship. It's not about buildings or anything of the sort. Yahweh accepted the temple. He didn't want the temple. He accepted the temple as an offering from David. He was quite content to have his presence dwell in that attentive meeting where people would come and make their offerings. He didn't need anything big and elaborate. The building was more about those people who offered it than it was about Yahweh. And he promised that he would use it in the way that they wanted him to use it. He made these promises about prayer and such. But the key was the relationship. And basically he turns around and says, if you lose the relationship, I'm going to destroy this building. Like, you're not going to have this building without relationship. And that's what he says here. He says, however, if you or your sons turn away from following me and don't observe the commands and regulations that I give you and go to serve other gods and worship them, then I will remove Israel from the land I gave them, and I will reject the temple that I dedicated for my name. Israel will become a joke, insulted by everyone. And he goes on to talk about the destruction of Israel, the destruction of the temple, and how people would walk by and wonder, why was it their God abandoned them? And then it stands as a testimony, not against Yahweh, but against Israel. It wasn't Yahweh who abandoned them. It was Israel who abandoned him. So in going along with that thought, okay, so we're going from verse 6 and 7. We're going to continue on with 8 and 9 along this thoughts. And he says, everyone who passes by this temple so lofty now will be shocked and will whistle, wondering, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and this temple? The answer will come because they deserted the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt's land. They embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. So there, I wasn't lying. Okay, in verse 11 and 12, we see that this relationship he has with Hiram, King Hiram of Tyre. I gave Solomon all the cedar, pine wood, and gold that he wanted. Then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 towns in the region of Galilee. Hiram went from Tyre to inspect the towns Solomon had given him. They didn't seem adequate in his view. Whoa. But in saying that, it was an important relationship. So Hiram still honored Solomon. He didn't feel honored by Solomon. That's amazing, isn't it? But he still honored Solomon. And then we have the ugly part of the Jewish history in verses 20 to 21. And we find all the remnants, all the nations that were supposed to be killed, that were not killed, are now enslaved. They become the slaves of Israel. Israel becomes the elite. They become the soldiers, the architects, the artists, the musicians, all this sort of stuff, and the non-Jews in Israel become the slaves, the workforce. So any non-Israelite people who remained of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, that is, the descendants of such people who were still in the land because the Israelites weren't able to wipe them out, Solomon forced into the labor gangs that are still in existence today. So when it was being recorded, not today. So today, as in when this was written down. And then we look at verse 25. This is a telling thing. 3 years or 3 times a year, Solomon would offer entirely burned offerings and well-being sacrifices on the altar that he had built for the Lord. Along with this, he would burn incense to the Lord. In this way, he completed the temple. Now, I know it's reading between the lines, but I want you to stop and think about David. David worshiped the Lord wherever he was. He made offerings wherever he was. He prayed. He inquired of the Lord wherever he was. But Solomon, he restricted Yahweh to the temple. This is he was very religious in his thinking. He followed the law. He did what the law said, which required sacrifices 3 times a year. And Solomon followed that, but he didn't go above that. There's no passion in the relationship like what David had. Solomon treated God like any of the other nations would treat their idols, and that's as far as he went. And that's a telltale sign, and I hope that you can see that. And we need to be careful that we do not allow religious structure to take the place of the relationship. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with our ceremonies, nothing whatsoever. There's nothing wrong with our celebrations. There's nothing wrong with our gatherings and all that. But if we do that without the relationship, then it's absolutely useless and an insult to our Father. You have to have the relationship. The relationship can be expressed through this various things, but you have conversation with him all the time throughout your day. He's included in everything in your life. And he gives you direction. He helps you make decisions. It's him. It's all on him. And so, yeah, just keep that in mind as we go forward. And then there's some telltale signs here of Solomon's wealth. We know that his initial wealth came illegally. It came by the horse trade. It came in partnership with Egypt, which he wasn't supposed to have. So there was a bunch of stuff going on there. The king was not supposed to accumulate a lot of wealth. So that's a big problem here again with Solomon. But we see some of the source of his wealth here in verse 26 to 28. King Solomon built a fleet near Elath in Ezer-Geber on the coast of the Reed Sea in the land of Edom. Hiram sent his expert sailors on the fleet along with Solomon's workers. They went to Ophir for 420 kikars of gold, which they brought back to King Solomon. So there is a source of his wealth right there. Now in Second Chronicles, we're going to go to Second Chronicles now, chapter 8. There's some things that are dealt with here, and there's a recognition. You know, there are some Jewish scholars right now that condemn Solomon, that says that his act of marrying Pharaoh's daughter was illegal. There's others that say, according to tradition, that she converted over to Judaism. But we see here some recognition from Solomon about what he had done by marrying a foreign wife. So Solomon brought Pharaoh's daughter from David's city to a palace, because he had built two palaces, similar palaces. There's the one he had in Jerusalem, and there's another one he built elsewhere for Pharaoh's daughter. I'm not exactly sure where that was, to a palace he had built for her, because he said, my wife mustn't live in the palace of Israel's King David, because the places where the Lord's chest has been are holy. So, yeah, so we see him moving her out of the holy city. And then in verse 14 and 15, we have this. Just as his father David had ordered, Solomon set up the divisions of the priests for their services and the Levites to their posts for offering praise and ministering in front of the priest, doing what needed to be done each day, as well as the gatekeepers and their divisions at each gate, because this was what David, the man of God, had commanded. They didn't deviate in any way from the king's commands concerning the priests, the Levites, or the treasuries. And that was the last part of David's life, wasn't it? Was getting this all organized and ready. And so when the temple was built, the job descriptions had already been dispersed. And nobody had to sit around and wonder, how are we going to do this now? Because David had already done that. And he had the job descriptions, divided up the families and the responsibilities, and it was easy peasy, because of the work that David had put into it, and Solomon carried that out. So there you go. Some interesting facts there, some spiritual life things for you to consider that we're talking about, and some interesting tidbits and facts. But go with the first. Go with that spiritual life impact stuff, because the tidbits of information are interesting as you sit and have coffee with a friend. But it's the other stuff that we put into practice every day in our relationships with people around us. Okay, so you guys be blessed today. Be encouraged. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I pray it's sunny and warm where you are today, so you can get outside and enjoy it. And yeah, we'll meet up again tomorrow. God bless.